I've always been the kind of person who notices the little things, the way Emily used to hum softly while making coffee, the way she'd brush her hair back when she was deep in thought. Those tiny details made me feel connected to her, like I understood her in a way no one else could. But recently, something about those moments felt different. It started small. Her phone was always face down now, even when it wasn't ringing or buzzing. She used to tell me about her day without me asking, but lately I had to pull answers from her like a reluctant thread, and when she did answer, it felt rehearsed, like she was ticking off a mental checklist instead of actually talking to me. The first time I really noticed it was a Saturday morning. We'd always spend those mornings together, her by the window with her coffee and me scrolling through the news. But that day, her coffee was still on the counter, untouched, even though she'd been in a rush to leave for a work meeting. The chair she always sat in was neatly pushed in, like she hadn't even been there at all. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overthinking. But deep down, something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the coffee or the chair. It was the growing silence between us, the kind that wasn't comfortable anymore. It felt like I was standing in a house I'd lived in for years, only to realize someone had rearranged the furniture while I wasn't looking. It started as a small nagging feeling, something I could easily brush off if I tried hard enough. But as the days went on, that feeling became harder to ignore. Emily's late-night giggles over her phone, the way she'd angle the screen away when I walked into the room. It was subtle, but undeniable. I told myself it was just work stress, maybe a private chat with a friend. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered something I didn't want to hear. The first real crack appeared one evening when Emily said she was going out for a team dinner. She was dressed better than usual for a work outing, wearing the red dress I'd bought her last Christmas. When she left, I felt a strange mix of unease and confusion, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. After all, we'd been together for years. Why would she lie to me? That night, I found the receipt. It was tucked into her coat pocket when I went to hang it up. An elegant restaurant I'd only seen in photos, the kind of place we'd always said we'd visit for a special occasion. The date on the receipt was from 2 days before. My heart sank as I stared at it. Emily had told me she was working late that evening. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe her team had gone there for drinks after work. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe her. But the unease had planted itself firmly in my mind, and no amount of reasoning could shake it. The turning point came the next morning. Emily's phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. It wasn't unusual, except this time, the notification lit up the screen long enough for me to see it. Can't stop thinking about last night. Matt. I froze. My hands felt cold as I stared at the message, trying to process what I was seeing. Who was Matt? What was last night? I didn't need answers to know what it meant. The voice I'd been ignoring for weeks screamed at me now, louder than ever. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. That evening, while she was on one of her long phone calls in the bathroom, I logged into her laptop. It wasn't hard to guess her password. She'd never changed it since we'd set it up together. What I found made my stomach twist. There were messages, photos, even a confirmation for a car rental I'd never heard about. A key I found in her purse later that night matched the vehicle. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real, undeniable. My world was starting to fall apart, but a part of me was determined not to let it end like this. If Emily thought I'd sit quietly in the dark, she was wrong. I wasn't ready to confront her, yet, but I was going to fight back my way. When I closed her laptop that night, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest was heavy, and my thoughts were scattered, jumping between disbelief and anger. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sheer audacity of it all. The messages, the photos, the lies. It was all right there, and yet a part of me still didn't want to believe it. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor where her heels lay neatly by the dresser. Those same heels had been in the photos with her and Matt, standing side by side at the restaurant. The trust I had built with her over the years now felt like a joke. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, frozen. Memories flooded my mind, the day we met, the way she smiled when I proposed, the promises we made to each other. How had it come to this? What had I done wrong? My mind spiraled, questioning every moment we'd shared. But no matter how much I searched for answers, the blame wasn't mine to carry. Still, the hurt was unbearable. By the time Emily came out of the bathroom, I had managed to put on a mask of calm. She kissed me on the cheek and climbed into bed, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. I lay there in silence, listening to her breathe as she fell asleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even close my eyes without seeing those messages. The next day, I was a mess. At work, I stared blankly at my computer screen, unable to focus on anything. A part of me wanted to storm home and demand answers, but another part of me knew I needed to think carefully about my next steps. What if I confronted her and she denied everything? What if she tried to twist it back on me? I had to be sure, not just for myself but for what came next. I kept replaying everything in my mind. Her excuses, her secrecy, the way she'd been pulling away. It all made sense now, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Every time I thought about the way she smiled in those photos, I felt sick. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was physical, it was intentional, and it was with someone she chose over me. That night, as I lay awake again, I made a decision. I wouldn't let her lies control me, and I wouldn't let my anger make me reckless. If she thought she could walk all over me and get away with it, she was wrong. I didn't know exactly what my plan was yet, but I knew one thing. I was going to fight back, and I was going to do it on my terms. The decision to fight back brought a strange sense of calm. I wasn't going to let my anger dictate my actions. I needed a plan. Emily had underestimated me, and that would be her mistake. For years, I'd been the quiet, trusting one in our relationship. But now, I was ready to be something she didn't expect. Smart, strategic, and unrelenting. The first person I turned to was my best friend, David. He had a knack for staying level-headed and had always been the voice of reason in my life. Over a late-night beer at his place, I finally laid everything out, the messages, the photos, and my suspicions about her secret trips. David didn't interrupt, just listened, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Don't confront her yet. Not until you have everything. You need to be sure, and when you are, you need to make it count." His words struck a chord. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure she couldn't lie or twist the truth. The next day I started gathering evidence. I installed a keylogger on our shared laptop, something David had suggested. It felt invasive, but after everything I'd already seen, I needed confirmation straight from her. Over the next week, I uncovered everything. Messages, photos, even a folder where she'd saved their vacation itinerary. A beach resort 2 hours away. They were meeting there in a week. The anger I'd been holding back surged, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control now. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about making her face the consequences. I wasn't interested in shouting matches or petty revenge. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Over the next few days, I prepared carefully. I booked a room at the same resort, using a fake name and paying in cash to stay under the radar. I even hired a local photographer to discreetly capture their meeting. It wasn't about public humiliation, but I wanted undeniable proof in case she tried to deny it later. David helped me fine-tune the details, making sure I covered every angle. By the night before their trip, everything was in place. Emily was oblivious, packing her bag with a smile she hadn't shown me in months. I watched her from the doorway, feeling a mix of anger and determination. She had no idea what was coming. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a strange sense of closure. Tomorrow wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about reclaiming my power. Emily thought she could keep me in the dark, but she'd soon realize I wasn't someone to be taken lightly. The day of their getaway arrived, and I was ready. I had driven to the resort the night before, checking into my room under the fake name I had used to make the reservation. The place was beautiful, exactly the kind of spot Emily had always talked about visiting. I couldn't help but feel bitter as I walked through the lush gardens, imagining how she must have planned this trip so carefully for someone who wasn't me. By the afternoon, I was settled in. The local photographer I had hired, a quiet man named Greg, arrived right on time. We went over the plan one last time. Greg's job was simple: stay in the background and capture everything. He assured me he'd be discreet, blending in like any other guest. Emily and Matt arrived around sunset. I watched from a distance as they checked in, laughing and leaning into each other like a couple on their honeymoon. My stomach churned, but I kept my emotions in check. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. Their dinner reservation was at 7:30. I waited until they were seated in the resort's outdoor dining area, a romantic spot lit by flickering candles and surrounded by palm trees. From where I stood, hidden behind a cluster of bushes, I could see Emily's face clearly. She was glowing, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. It hurt, but it also strengthened my resolve. At exactly 8 o'clock, I walked into the dining area. My heart was pounding, but outwardly, I was calm. I wore a neutral expression as I approached their table, holding an envelope with the printed photos and screenshots I had collected. The restaurant was quiet, the sound of soft music and clinking glasses filling the air. As I reached their table, Emily's smile faded. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Good evening," I said, placing the envelope on the table in front of her. Matt froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, while Emily stammered, "Michael, what are you doing here?" "I think you know," I replied, my voice steady. I gestured to the envelope. "Go ahead, open it." Emily hesitated, her hands trembling as she pulled out the photos. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the evidence of her betrayal. Matt shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unsure of what to say or do. Around us, a few diners glanced over, sensing the tension but unsure of what was happening. "I trusted you," I said, keeping my tone even. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence that followed was deafening. As I turned and walked away, I felt an odd sense of relief. I wasn't finished yet. There were still consequences for her to face. But this was the first step. I had taken back control, and she never saw it coming. As I walked away from their table, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, and a lingering sadness. I had done what I came to do, but the weight of Emily's betrayal still sat heavy in my chest. My legs felt like they were moving on their own, carrying me back to my room, away from the scene I had created. Behind me, I could hear the low murmur of voices as other diners whispered about what they had just witnessed. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. I stared at her name on the screen, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Michael, please," she began, her voice shaky. "Let me explain, it's not what you think." I let her speak, though I knew exactly what she was going to say. She rambled about feeling neglected, about how work had consumed my time, and how she'd been lonely. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you I wasn't happy." I listened, but her words felt hollow. Every excuse she made felt like a slap in the face. I had worked so hard to build a life for us, to make her happy, and now she was blaming me for her choices. "Emily," I said calmly when she finally stopped, "you could have talked to me. You could have been honest. Instead, you lied. Don't try to make this my fault." There was a long pause before she whispered, "I'm sorry." But even that felt insincere. When I hung up, I realized something. I wasn't just angry at her anymore. I was angry at myself for letting it get this far, for ignoring the signs, for putting her happiness above my own for so long. But in that moment, I also knew that this was the beginning of something new. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. The next few weeks were hard. I felt liberated in some ways, like I had taken back control of my life. But I also felt broken. Memories of our time together haunted me. and I couldn't help but question what was real and what wasn't. I leaned heavily on David, who reminded me that healing would take time. "You deserve someone who values you," he told me one night. "Don't let her mistakes make you doubt that." My family was a lifeline too. They rallied around me, reminding me of who I was before Emily. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I took up hobbies I had abandoned, like hiking and painting. I even joined a local community group, meeting people who shared my interests and made me laugh again. Emily tried to reach out a few more times, but I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to her. For the first time in years, I was focusing on myself, what I needed, what I deserved. It wasn't easy, but step by step, I was finding my way back to who I was before her lies. Serving Emily with the divorce papers was both one of the hardest and most liberating moments of my life. When she opened the envelope and saw the undeniable proof, her face went pale. She tried to argue, saying we could work through it, that it was a mistake, that she still loved me. But her words felt empty, like echoes in a room I'd already left behind. "This isn't just about the affair, Emily," I told her, my voice steady but firm. "It's about trust. You didn't just break my heart, you broke everything we built together." Her tears didn't move me. For years I had sacrificed parts of myself to make her happy, thinking that was what love was. But now I realized that real love doesn't come with betrayal. It was time to move forward without her. As the divorce process unfolded, I started to feel lighter, like I was shedding a weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Emily's affair with Matt fell apart quickly. He disappeared the moment things got complicated. She tried reaching out a few times after the papers were signed, apologizing and saying she missed me. But I knew better. What she missed wasn't me, it was the version of me who would have forgiven her and taken her back. That person was gone. Over the next year, I focused on rebuilding my life. At first, it was hard. The silence in the apartment was deafening, and the memories of her lingered in every corner, but I refused to let them define me. I threw myself into things I loved but had neglected for years: painting, hiking, even volunteering at a local charity. Slowly, the pieces of my life started coming back together. One evening, I attended a charity gala for the organization I'd been volunteering with. It was a simple event, but something about it felt different, like the closing of one chapter and the start of another. As I mingled with the crowd, I met someone, Sophia. She wasn't like Emily. There was a warmth to her, an openness that felt genuine. We talked for hours that night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Sophia didn't try to fix me or rush me into anything. She simply listened, laughed, and shared her own stories of rebuilding after heartbreak. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something real, something I could trust. Looking back, I don't regret what happened with Emily. It hurt, and it changed me, but it also taught me what I deserve and what I will never accept again. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable. Infidelity can shatter trust, but it can also teach us about resilience and self-worth. Have you ever had to rebuild after betrayal? Share your thoughts or stories below. I'd love to hear how you found strength through the pain.